Welcome to Globewatch with me, Charles Ebune from the Egyptian Embassy here in Yaoundé, Cameroon. A plus 100 million market space today. Egypt is beyond the pyramids and monuments that retell its civilization, simply qualified as the basis for humanity. For the past 1 year, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was at the helm of the rotating presidency of the African Union chairmanship. So many issues to discuss: economic integration, stabilization of the continent, plus encouraging that Africans know each other better. Was there a fair policy implementation to bring African prosperity closer to the African people during the presidency of Egypt of the African Union? My guest today on the program is the country's chief diplomat in Cameroon. MEDHAT MELIGY, welcome to Globewatch.
Thank you. Welcome to you.
You are the third largest economy on the continent, Egypt. And when there was the African Union meeting mid-year last year in Niamey, Niger, this is what the then president of the African Union, your president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, declared about the African Continental Free Trade Area. It will reinforce our negotiation position on the international stage. It will represent an important step. It seems to me that regional integration was one of your success stories for this rotating presidency, right?
Exactly. Actually, this is one of many axes that Egypt undertook during its presidency last year. I mean, it was one of the most important things that we thought of. I mean, we are talking about a market that is about 100 million person. I'm sorry, 1 billion person, which is the African continent. So it was quite an important step that we start with many other African countries to put this trade in action. And the reason is that I think that the experience have shown us that the trade among ourselves will be more rentable than what we all are aspiring to the north of the continent or to even other markets such as Asia and Americas. So this, I think, was one of the most important things that His Excellency, the President of the Republic, wanted to implement during his presidency year.
And when Egypt was taking over the presidency of the African Union, there was particular context in which that mandate was handed to President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Your ambassador to the African Union in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, published a list of 6 main areas of interest, which you simply called your priority areas. This is in reality the document in front of me. Can you remind my audience some of those your priorities?
Well, I think that we can talk first about the continental free zone trade
which had to do with the economic plan.
Exactly, and then there was the peace and settlement of many conflicts in the continent.
That was point number 2, peace and security.
Exactly, peace and security, and there was the reintegration of those who were involved in wars and in conflicts into the society. And as a matter of fact, Egypt is hosting one of the UA bodies in Cairo for the reintegration of those people. I mean,
you're talking about building bridges about African people.
Exactly. So I mean, I think, well, there are many aspects, not just those 6 actually. I don't want to limit myself to them because we've seen during this period that took a year, we've seen over 140 meetings and conferences, whether in Cairo or abroad. The president himself took over 40 visits in Africa during the whole year.
One of the other area of interest, as outlined in your policy statement, was institutional and financial reform of the African Union. This is a presidency that finally saw the implementation of the most chanted reforms. For example, the new economic partnership for African development moved to African Development Agency. How did he succeed in helping that these files move forward?
Well, let's say that this particular issue the most important thing is to raise awareness among the presidents and among the African public about the importance of the reforms of the African Union. As you know, the African Union is not an independent body. It represents the willingness of over 55 countries in Africa to address a certain issue. So the idea is not to force and not to implement those ideas of reforms without having a consensus among the countries. And don't forget that not all the priorities for these reforms are one in all countries. I mean, you have some countries who are thinking about this more than others, and some areas of focus that could be different from one country to another.
More of the organizational funding comes from African countries. For example, they were talking about the land tax, so that Africans can fund their institutions alone instead of depending from the European Union, the Chinese from time to time.
Well, let me put it this way. As I just mentioned a few seconds ago, the idea is to put every country in front of its responsibilities, but you cannot. I mean, every country has its own integrity and has its own independence and its position about each and everything. And some countries do not even have the capacity of being able to fund some of the activities. So you have to take it in this light. You have to understand that you cannot just put a rule for everybody to follow, but you have to mention it and you have to see the reactions and start taking it from there. So it's not an easy task, actually, when it comes to any funding in general. I mean, even the United Nations, sometimes they have problems in funding some of its missions of the peacekeeping forces and so on, because not all countries are involved. Some countries, for political reasons, do not want to fund some others. And we've seen this, I mean, in the United Nations, so why not see it also on the African level? But the idea is to keep mentioning and raising the important issue that you think that they are pertinent for everyone to address.
Some analysts, including the Institute for Security Studies based in South Africa, believe that there is a kind of new spirit or renewal or renaissance which was brought in, especially when it comes to multilateral cooperation, that for the very first time we saw the first ever Russia-Africa summit here. How much pride does President al-Sisi's African Union presidency can take of that? This is the first time we saw Russia coming in with a debt write-off of roughly $20 billion for the African economies. That was huge, right?
Exactly. Well, let me put it this way. I mean, Africa represents a gold mine for many superpowers and regional powers. Africa possesses resources that are very much needed abroad. The idea is that those countries now they want to reach those resources. So in order to do so, we want to canalize this. We don't want it to be sporadic efforts, because the idea, I mean, we've learned this even when we were small children, that when we are gathered together, we can be stronger than individually speaking. And this is the idea, is to speak and negotiate as a team, as a continent, as Africans, all of us together. And this, I think, was one of the most important points that President al-Sisi was always thinking about when he was taking any decision, that how to reinforce the African capacities in front of the rest of the world. I mean, we have to not to leave each country with some of us. I mean, we have to admit some countries in Africa are poor or less fortunate than others, or have problems in governments, or have civil wars, or have conflicts. So we have to understand that this affects its decision and its capacity to negotiate. So the idea is to give more power by talking on continental basis. I mean, when we are all as African talking in one voice.
There is this whole concept of civilization started from Egypt. When in the 21st century, the Egyptians are the head of the African Union, the continent's largest diplomatic gathering, does the history, the culture of the country itself weigh on the leaders to take the kind of decisions that will have more of an African outlook? You yourself, you call the African Egypt. That is how you call it.
I call it African Egypt because this is our real roots. I mean, we cannot neglect that our roots are Africans. I mean, whether we like it or not. I mean, and we like it. I mean, we are proud of this. I mean, the first dynasty in Egypt was a dynasty of the Nubians, and those are black Egyptians.
The Nubians currently somewhere around Sudan today.
Well, north of Sudan, actually, they are still Egyptian.
Absolutely.
But this was the first dynasty during the Pharaonic era.
Yeah.
So I mean, and this is, I mean, when they start about thinking about building the pyramids and building the great monuments that we are seeing today. So we are really proud of our African heritage. Having said that, we totally believe that Africa is our deep and profound strategic backyard. We have to be in good understanding with all the African countries. We have to have these good relations. Maybe for some political reason at a period prior to the current one, our ties were not as strong as they are today. I mean, look at President Sisi and how much, I mean, I think over 60% of the visits of President Sisi were to Africa this year, more than the others.
Does the fact that Egypt runs, for example, a media forum for African journalists where they meet President Al-Sisi and others discuss about communication, is it that new spirit of connected Africans among Africans by the Egyptian administration?
Of course, no doubt about it. I mean, it's very important that we think in a loud voice and in one voice. I mean, we have to understand, all of us, that our real impact will be when we are united. So we have to understand each other more. I mean, let me put this in another way. We do not know much and enough about each other. I mean, let me give you an example. Egyptians think that maybe Cameroonians don't spend their whole time playing football. This is the idea that they have in their mind. And some African countries still that we're still riding camels.
On behalf of Cameroon, you hosted the 2019 African
Exactly. And I mean, we even said that we are hosting it as if we are hosting it on behalf of Cameroon. So, I mean, this was the point. I mean, we complement each other.
Okay. The African Union has committed itself to the 2063 vision. And to reach there was this element of silencing guns by 2020. And this is a fight that the Egyptian presidency had to handle. Did your presidency try to understand why a continent where there are just roughly 30 million of illegally circulating armed weapons, there are more conflicts than in Europe where 84 million illegal arms are circulating?
Yes.
When you look at the picture in Libya, the picture in the Sahel, the picture in Egypt itself, around the Sinai, Cameroon, Northwest, Southwest, the far north.
Good. Don't you think that this is a very good start to silencing the weapons and silencing the guns? This is the whole point. I mean, of course, I mean, we were just paving the road maybe with the same concept for South Africa that adopted this as its slogan this year, silencing the guns. But let me say one thing, that in parallel with this idea, I want to add something, and I think it's a concept that we applied during the whole year of presidency, that we have to look for African solutions for African problems. Don't look outside of the border of this continent. Based on this, we do not want also to internationalize what is national. If there is a certain national conflict in any country, we don't accept to make it international and by having external forces to intervene. Just a second, let me finish my idea.
Yes.
To intervene in this internal conflict in this or that particular country. So we have to have those two ideas in parallel, that we have to find African solution for the African problems with the theory of silencing the gun, with the implementation of this.
You just spoke of providing African solutions to African problems. Does that explain why during your presidency you succeeded to carve out the Aswan Peace and Development Forum, a kind of Paris Peace Forum, a kind of Krans Montana, to say that, look, we can sit here in Aswan, we can sit here in Yaoundé, we can sit in Harare and solve problems rather than meeting maybe in Paris, maybe in London or whatsoever. Was that the ideology?
Of course. I mean, look at the concept of the conference itself. The conference was the first step towards understanding that we and only we can find solutions for the continent problem, whether we are talking about armed conflicts or about economical reforms or other ideas of advancing for the continent. We have to work on the level of our continent. We are not immature, we are not young anymore in this world. We are quite capable of achieving our goals by ourselves.
One of the key problems facing Africa today, and which your presidency handled, was terrorism. Be it in Egypt, be it in Libya, be it in the Sahel. The EU just announced an expedition of roughly 3,000 soldiers to combat terrorism in the Sahel area. And my question to you is this: you have had a huge experience of dealing with terrorism, especially in northern Egypt. Tell me one particular policy in Egypt which is not found in any other African country when it comes to counter-terrorism initiatives, which President Al-Sisi tried to bring on the table at the African Union to say, look, this is our own model.
Well, it's very simple, because you cannot apply one model on all countries. I mean, this is our model. It worked fine with us, that we managed to silence the guns of terrorism in Egypt. I mean,
what did you do actually? What did you do actually?
I will tell you. I mean, we just took it step by step, and we took it with the people involved, the people concerned themselves. I mean, we have this terrorist problem in northern Sinai. We couldn't have accomplished what we accomplished if we did not have the help of the people themselves, who were actually helping the government to localize those terrorists. I mean, this is a very important thing. The nature of the desertic areas in Sinai, northern Sinai, is different than the forests in other African countries and so on. But so I cannot just give you a model, the model that worked for us, but we have experience. And based on this experience, we can help others, other fighters, I mean, not fighters, but I mean other
countries combating terrorism.
Exactly. Some countries who are combating terrorism, and give them our experience in how to combat it.
You just saw what the United Nations Security Council resolution has indicated, that to maintain state sovereignty, to maintain the territorial integrity of countries, states have been empowered to deal enough with terrorist organizations in their countries. Some take the form of secessionist movements. How did Egypt recently welcome such a decision by the UN Security Council?
Well, it's a logical decision of the UN. I mean, we have to take tangible steps in order to reach peace and security in every and each country. And in order to do so, we have to take and undertake some measures that we are doing. I mean, a country like Cameroon is doing its best to fight its own terrorist activities in the northern part of the countries. We've seen, I have visited myself the area in the extreme north, and I saw how people are suffering there. And actually, if there wasn't this presence of the government that is quite heavy there, people wouldn't be even able to live there.
Do you feel a bit disappointed that, be it in the presidency of President Paul Kagame that you replaced, of Rwanda, another transformative leader like your president, you are unable to quench the situation in Libya, that you are unable to quench the situation in other hot spots on the continent? Did you feel disappointed?
Well, I could say yes and no. I mean, we were disappointed because we couldn't reach what we want to reach, but at the end of the day, who could? I mean, we've seen many superpowers, whether we're talking about the big superpowers like the United States or Russia or the European Union, trying to do their best to stop some violence in some areas. And they couldn't really manage to do it. Look at the situation in Iraq. This was a total invasion of the United States. I put this
question to you because most people think that while the Egyptians were handling the presidency of the African Union, at the same time they are seen today, or at the time, as a source of the problem in Libya, because you support one of the factions group. Why don't you say that we don't support anybody? Everybody should come to the table. Let's provide an African solution to the situation in Libya, which is already chaotic.
I appreciate your question, actually, but I don't know what are you referring to about supporting a certain fraction in Libya. We are supporting the Libyan people. We have a common border of 1,000. We have to secure our own national security.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, we have to help the Libyan to find their path and to find the peace. But we are not coming from way far or trying to implement any Egyptian forces that are present there. Whether, I mean, we have long-term cooperation deals with the Libyans. So that's what we are implementing due to the common borders that we have. So I don't know, I mean, if I understood you correctly.
Well, you understood me correctly because
we
thought that
as... Do you hear about any Egyptian military presence?
No, I'm not talking about military presence. I'm not talking about military presence, and I'm not talking any kind of financial support here. The kind of support I'm talking is an overt endorsement of Khalifa as a United Nations member. We thought that you could have backed the UN-backed government of Sharash. That is the kind of support I'm talking.
We are helping the Libyan people. We are taking it all the wrong way. I mean, the idea is not about this or that. It's about what the Libyan people wants. And that's what we are helping to implement, the peace in the country.
Coronavirus has caused chaotic disruption of the international gatherings agenda. This is a country that receives roughly 9 million tourists, and I'm talking about here of the 2018 statistics. That figure came up from 5 million in 2016 with a financial turnout of roughly $9 billion. Your tourism industry is in danger where everything is being shut. How worried is the Egyptian government in the era of coronavirus, and especially the Ministry of Antiquities?
We are not the only ones suffering. I mean, we are not the #1 country in the world receiving tourists, such as France or Spain. They are suffering even much more than us. But, I mean, the lesson we learned since our revolution in 2011 came into effect these days, because President El-Sisi always wanted not to base ourselves on one source of income to the country.
You are talking tourism, about the diversification of the Egyptian economy.
Exactly. So this is the main idea. That's why I think you have seen and you heard about many other projects that the government is undertaking to diversify the economy in Egypt, in order to, if you have one arm or leg that is not working, which is tourism not working as we expect to, then you have other arms. That the season of tourism is in the winter, European winter. So this is the high season of Egyptian tourism, so the weather would be fine for the tourists who are coming from the north. But in the summer, this will help two things. First of all, we do not expect many tourists in the summer, except for beach tourism, which is
means
more...
that currently you are in a difficult position because planes cannot fly into
I did not finish my idea.
Okay.
If you allow me.
Okay.
So the idea is that now we are approaching the end. So this is not, I mean, the whole season was without any coronavirus threats. But now this is the end. And in the summer, this will help in two ways. First of all, we have summer tourism that is based on other type of tourism, such as the Arab world and the Egyptians themselves. And second, which is more important, that the rise of temperature in Egypt will definitely eliminate any possible threats of coronavirus. I think you've read in many reports that are talking about the virus that it cannot live in hot weather. And that's why the African continent, as you've seen, is not suffering much from corona as much as countries in the north.
I can't leave this interview without putting this question to you. And you mentioned it midway of the interview. You said that there has been so many lessons learned since your revolution in 2011. And one of the key figures of that revolution just passed away. I'm talking about the rise President Hosni Mubarak. He was part of the 20th century towering figures, Mandela's, Margaret Thatcher, Mikhail Gorbachev,
who did not pass away?
Harafi. No, Mikhail Gorbachev is yet to cross the bar. How much is Egypt losing its former rise?
I was quite thrilled by the fact that even the Cameroonian TV had a full program dedicated to President Hosni Mubarak here in Cameroon. I didn't expect that his influence was so strong, but actually there was a good show that was done on President Mubarak. As for us in Egypt, President Mubarak was a leader of the country for over 30 years. He has a big arm in what we consider the war in 1973. I mean, the Yom Kippur,
with the
in some versions, the 6th October War, as we call it.
Absolutely.
And in this war, we had the President Mubarak, who was the head of the Air Forces. He had the first say in this war. So that's why he's a war hero and decorated as so. Our economy that we are celebrating today in Egypt, the base of this economy was largely actually attributed to President Mubarak. I'm glad that this is how we are ending this interview by talking about the Egypt and about the size of Egypt and about the civilization of Egypt.
The instructions of the World Health Organization do not permit me currently to shake a hand with you, which is the tradition of this interview, but we'll just behave like others. Thank you very much for being guest on the program.